that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea.
And welcome back to week 2 of the election special. We're talking to council candidates vying for a seat at the table of power at the GDC. But first up, a massive thank you to Design Weasel, aka Chris Williams, for our brand spanking new intro design, and to Lenny Lawns, aka Leonard Powell, for the music. It's not easy running a show by yourself, but a little hand from a friend means a lot. But now we're jumping straight into it. We're talking to candidates about their ideas for Tairawhiti. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on. Now That's an Idea. Today, for the listeners, I'm joined by current councillor Rob Telfer, who is running again for a seat on the general ward here in Tairāwhiti. And before we get into your kind of big idea for Tairawhiti, how are you? Would you want to maybe introduce yourself to some of the listeners who don't know who you are and a bit of your history?
Yeah, well, I'm obviously Rob Telfer. I'm currently a first-term councillor, still learning the ropes. But previous to that, I was farming, actually dairy farming before I came to Gisborne 23 years ago, and then bought a sheep station, Waipawa Station, up in the hills, 65 k's from Gisborne. So I was there for 15 years, and during that time, I started the Waipawa Cadet Training Trust, which was a training scheme we set up to take 5 cadets in, and was very, very successful until, I sold it, and then and now it's actually the farm's actually being planted in pines. So that's a pity, but over that time we trained, I think I had 55 cadets go through while I was there. Probably one of the most rewarding things I've done in my life. And currently I've gone back on the board to get another one started between Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. So we're currently in the process of that. So it's pretty exciting stuff, really.
And you're also part of the AMP show, or used to be.
Yeah,
Is that
have
right?
been. I'm still on the executive, been on that for, I don't know how long now, probably 12, 14 years. But was the president for 2 years. You only do the president's job for 2. So done my time, but I've actually stayed on the executive. So it's a really good group of people that make that happen, which is one of our biggest events in Gisborne. So.
Yeah. Well, I just thought I'd bring that up because that kind of just shows how you've got connections with different groups of people. It's, Gisborne's a varied place with a lot of farming people, but, the agricultural sector is kind of wide and far. Yeah. So what was the moment where you decided that it was time to run for council? Because I imagine that's it's not the most highly paid job, and council gets a lot of shtick. So why would you put yourself through this punishment?
Yeah, well, like a lot of people, I was probably one of the biggest moaners about council while I was farming and the frustrations. And then when I sold the farm, I was sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've actually got the time to dedicate to it. And it's something that, look, you certainly don't do it for the money. It's something that you need to commit to 100%. And it's something I'm a little bit disappointed with attendance levels. I think if you commit to something like this, you need to try and be there 100% of the time. And I was pretty much there 100% of the time, apart from while my wife was in hospital having a double hip transplant. Look, it's something I'm quite passionate about, and I think that we need to have a rural voice, at least one, if not more, preferably more, around the table, because we've got a huge catchment here in Gisborne, and you need to be hearing the voices of everybody.
Well, that's why we've got 12 on the council in total. So yeah, it's, like you say, good to have a diverse range of voices. So yeah, should we jump into it? Because the idea for this show was that, a lot of people say kind of these vague statements, and they're like, people only get to read a tiny small line. It's hard to really get a picture of who a candidate is. But I think also more importantly for me is how a candidate thinks about a problem and how they're going to address it. So I thought this was a good way to let voters and viewers know what you think are some of the major problems or things you want to champion, and how you're actually going to take the steps to get there. So yeah, I'd love to hear what your idea or project is you'd like to champion if you get voted in.
Yeah, well, it's probably the first thing around that is understanding what actually council does, and I think there's a lot of people don't quite get that. One thing I've found, and probably the most frustrating thing I've found being in council, is around compliance and around people coming to council wanting to do things, and instantly all the barriers are put up of why you can't do it. And I think we just need to have a really good look at changing that culture, changing the way we look at that, and more have an attitude of, right, well, how can we help you make this happen? And that might sound fairly broad, but I think it's actually a culture change. And I feel that local government has evolved into more of a strictly compliance-based model. And if we think about everybody that works in council, and we've got over 400, all those people are actually paid by the ratepayers. So in any other business, if you're working for who you're working for, that's, you're supposed to be trying to help them and make that work. So I think we can have a really good look, and it's probably some pretty hard conversations with key staff to have a look at how we can change that. How can we change the culture into a more of a, how can we make this happen for you? And some of the costs that are brought in with decisions that are made, I don't think people understand the cost implications to business when those decisions are made. And too many people walk away from something that should have been easier to get done. And we've had quite a few instances during our term, this first term, even though we've mainly been dealing with cyclones and trying to get through all that. So I think we need to get back to why we're here, and try and make it, I suppose, easier for the people who actually employ us.
So what's the specifics on how that's done? Because I know there's a culture change, but how do you start a culture change? Obviously, I'm just always in these interviews keen on some ideas on tangible steps, how you do that. Like, is it I don't know, starting a communications committee or something like that with people? So, because often, like you say, people don't actually know what council does some of the time. So when they ask council to do something, like they're like, fix these roads, you're like, that's actually, a central government road and we have nothing to do with it. And so is it communication, or is it, having things more led by businesses? What's your kind of first steps there?
I think that's a second step. Look, the first step is we've as councillors, we've got to be able to sit down and have some really good conversations with our CEO, with our key managers, to actually, see whether they're even willing to have a look at this. Because if they're not, we're fighting a losing battle. Because too many people, and I was included, think you come into council and you can go to staff and get them to do all these things. It doesn't actually work like that way. We actually only employ one person, and that's the CEO. And all the staff are the CEO's staff. So we have to respect that. No one wants to have 14 or 15 bosses. Look, I think it's a conversation we need to have, and we can't get any change unless we've got the people that can make the change on board. So that's the first step. Depending on how good that conversation goes, well, then we'd have to move into the next steps. But look, I think there's some real changes that we can make, getting people to understand the cost implications of some of these things we do.
Well, I know that with a lot of the, for people that don't know, when there's like papers that go towards councillors, there's the details of what council wants you guys to look at. And then it's got kind of down the bottom, it's got some, what do they call it, lenses or something. So it's got a climate change lens and like a iwi Māori lens. And so are you suggesting maybe there's room to add something like a business lens to decisions getting made? Is that like adding to complication, or would you do it some other way?
Look, that's one way we could do it, but sometimes adding to the problem creates another problem. Look, I honestly think it's more of a culture change, and if you can change a culture, people will buy into it. Nobody that works in council wants to get abused. Nobody that works there wants to have to put up with, bad behaviour. But unfortunately, that's what comes with people getting frustrated around decisions. So, look, I think there is something we can do, and you might say, well, that's near on impossible because it hasn't been done for donkey's years. But if you don't try these things and if you don't take a different approach, you'll actually always get the same answer. And in business, if you keep doing the same thing, you'll get the same answer. So we have to look at the way we're doing it. And I think getting people on board and them feeling that we're actually working for them rather than against them is the first culture change that we can make. But like I say, that's got to be driven from the top.
Yeah. So then the question is, how do you change that culture at the top? Does that mean like a new chief executive, or is that something you'd like to see, or how would you see that done?
No, it's not about new staff. It's not about anything like that. It's about having a real conversation about how we do things and how we drive the organisation. And I think that then has to be led from the top. And so, look, if people aren't willing to do that, well, then maybe that's a conversation we need to have, whether they are the right people. Look, that's not something for me as an individual to make. That's a council directive, if you like. And other people might not feel like I do that there is a problem, and that it is as important as what I sort of think it is. So, look, we've got to have that conversation at a governance level with key staff first, and if we get some traction there, well, then we can work out how we can move it through the organisation. But I honestly think that we could take a lot of costs out and a lot of frustration out for ratepayers, who are the people that we've been elected by to represent, if we have a look at our system. And at the moment, I just do not think our system is working as it should.
Yeah, so a culture change is, I think it's actually probably harder than it sounds. You know, it's like one of those things. It's like easy to say, but then actually implementing, a culture that's probably deeply ingrained in a council, and it's probably been ingrained for good reasons. Like the leaky homes and stuff like that. There's a lot of costs that come with getting things wrong. So I'm sure that some of the other people have said as well. There's perhaps a culture of risk aversion, and so you can see how it would build up over time. So what's a kind of timeline for you that you'd like to see culture change happen, and when would you kind of reach a point when you'd say, I don't think this is working, we need to make kind of a more significant change?
Look, I'd put a year, 12 months on it. We're going to have new councillors coming in to the council table, and these are conversations we've got to have as councillors. But look, if we hadn't had any traction on this, or we hadn't had cooperation to try and get it done, if it's any longer than the first 12 months of our term, then I'd be very disappointed.
And what would be a kind of indicator that things aren't changing?
I think basically, not so much interviewing, but recording people that are actually dealing with council on how they're feeling that's gone, and see whether there is the change that we think needs to happen. That is only going to come from the people that are actually applying for consents or wanting to do something, or, operating and need permission basically to do it through councils. They're the only people that are going to be able to give us feedback on how that's gone, and they found it easier than what they have in the past. And if we can change that, and if they are finding it easier, and I don't mean, when I say easier, I don't mean getting away with things. We don't want people to be breaking the law, but I do think that there are a lot of costs incurred that are unnecessary, and I just don't think maybe how those costs just add up, and all of a sudden something that seemed a very economical thing to do becomes uneconomical, and people walk away from it. So, we certainly don't want to go, breaking laws and whatnot, but I think you probably hit the nail on the head. Find council very, very risk adverse, and I think, it's the same old thing where nobody wants to put their signature on a piece of paper, so we get a consultant to review it, and we get it peer reviewed, and these costs just keep ticking over. And look, I just think people have to be brave enough to make decisions. If you're brave enough to make a decision and we get it wrong, well, then we will back you, because you made the decision and you've looked at the situation. So I think there is real room for our risk profile to be moved. And look, if this isn't seen as necessary or whatever, but the people I talk to in the community and the businesses I talk to in the community, this is one of their biggest frustrations.
Yeah, and it can always, it might be that consents and things are split up into low risk and high risk. So, things like leaky homes or things that have potential to be risky can get the right kind of attention they deserve. But then, there's so many small alterations that probably have a little bit too much time spent on them that slow things down. Because I think that's probably another thing that isn't acknowledged very often, is a consent costs money, but it's actually maybe the month or 2 months that is the real cost, where you're still paying rates, mortgage, insurance on something like that. So it can kind of expand over time.
Certainly.
Did you have any other kind of ideas knocking around that you'd like to see? Kind of just smaller ones that are projects or something that you're passionate about? Nothing, it doesn't have to change the world, but just
Well,
different
actually,
road.
bigger project actually. But look, there's various people working on around Gisborne at the moment on irrigation supply for our flats, and that's one of the areas that is the biggest handbrake we've got in this district for economical growth at the moment. And if we can unlock that potential by looking at a huge irrigation scheme for the Poverty Bay flats, the benefits and the uplift for this whole community, and that's exactly what we need at the moment. We've had some pretty hard years of cyclones and knockbacks and whatnot, and I think we need a positive story, and I think this could be it. So look, I'm going to get right behind those people and try and drive this as hard as we can, because I think if we look at what the government mandates at the moment around economic development and about us trying to look after ourselves a bit more, and the more we can generate from this community, the more rates we create by higher value properties. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that we'll look back on and say, if we could pull this off, that was one of the biggest things that's happened in Gisborne for donkey's years. So there are people working on it, and I thank them for that, but I'm certainly going to get behind them and try and make this a real driver, because we need it.
Yeah. Irrigation, water, and not to forget about roads. I think this is probably my first interview where we haven't talked about roads yet.
Well, I think everybody's right up to date with that and the frustration and whatnot, but we've got to make sure that we need to look after ourselves a bit, and this irrigation scheme is something that would just unlock huge potential that we're sitting on here, and also a backup for our town water supply. As most people, everybody that lives in Gisborne realises how we lost our actual water supply during Cyclone Gabriel. So, we're vulnerable. This would actually give us another backup to the scheme. But I just think the huge economic benefits, and this filters right through all businesses that feed off that, all businesses in town that feed off the businesses that feed off that. It's just huge money go round, and we certainly need it. And I think that this is the one thing that we can actually really get by and try and make happen.
Yeah, awesome. All right, would you like to give me a little candidate closing pitch of why people should vote for you? If you're kind of stuck in an elevator and you got 30 seconds, what do you say to someone?
Well, look, I'm currently in my first term, and I don't think I've finished contributing. I've got the time to give this 100%, and I want to see some things through. I'll definitely make sure I give it my best shot for you, and I hope you vote for me.
Now, I do have little pop quiz, rapid fire answers, which can be controversial, probably not. All right, are you ready? Favorite fish and chip shop in Tairawhiti?
Aberdeen Road.
Nice. Favorite Lord of the Rings character?
Don't know them, never seen it.
It's been the dud question of the pop quiz. Whale Rider or Boy?
Boy.
And Māori wards, yes or no?
No.
And people find winter quite difficult in Tairāwhiti sometimes, just sociably, things going on. Do you have a trick to getting through winter?
A trick to getting through winter? Probably go to the islands, really. It's been pretty wet here, so yeah, that's probably the best trick. Go on holiday.
And final question, decider, a power pie, yes or no?
Yes.
Correct answer. All right, thanks so much for being on the show.